How's life in the down under?
Oh, just up and down all the time now. Weird. Yep.
Got the beautiful weather down there right now.
Yeah, it's looking good. Oh, we're live.
We're live? Oh, dang.
I was not even paying attention.
And you know what? I am actually recording right now, so maybe I should stop and then restart it. How's life in the down under?
Hey, I'm Michael Dorinda.
And I'm Jake Bennett.
And welcome to episode 114 of the North Meet South Web podcast.
Chicka chicka Janet. I miss our intro music. I really miss it.
You miss it?
I love it. Yep.
You can just listen to it at the end. It's outro music now.
Nope. I'm gonna start editing the shows and then put it back in at the beginning.
Done deal. You do the editing. Nah.
You said it. You said it out loud. You're committed.
Hey, I'm all for you taking over the editing.
I probably should take it on for a little bit, huh? I mean, man, you've been editing every show every week for years now.
For a while.
Years. Yeah. Yep. I imagine you've got a pretty solid workflow down.
I mean, I've got the workflow down to looking for the bits where we talk over each other and looking for the obvious ums and ahs and then just deleting that. I very, very rarely censor content or anything like that. It's just where I know that there's obvious blunders and things like that I'll tidy up.
Just
for the most part. Yeah, just ship it. Just ship my pants, ship my podcast, ship it all.
I just shipped my drawers.
A long time listeners to the podcast. We'll get that one.
Hey, so last time we were on the show, we were talking about Vim. We had Jesse Leet on the show. And I think we both, or maybe just me, forgot to ask anybody to be on the show this week. So nobody is on the show this week except for you and me. So we're going to talk about Vim a little bit more.
The
two of us. We can Vim it if try. It's gonna be great. Okay.
Well,
so yeah, where we left off.
How did you
go? I did pretty good, I think. I mean, I've been using it more and more. And so where I got was I downloaded and installed NeoVim through Brew. And then I installed, well, not installed, but I'm using Vim plug, I think is what it is, to get all my plugins set up. So I've got that all going now. I've got a proper theme going on with some nerd fonts to do some icon replacements. So I've got is it Powerline bar? No, it's not Powerline. What's the bar along the bottom? Airline?
Yep, Airline. Yep.
Airline. Got Airline along the bottom there. I've got some code completion. I've got a Control P fuzzy search, Command P fuzzy search thing kind of going on. I've got Nerd Tree instead of the regular. No, not Nerd Tree. Is it good? Nerd Tree's good or no?
Sidebars are bad. Sidebars are illegal.
No, it's not. I don't have a sidebar.
The Vim police
don't have a sidebar. I just have Nerd Tree. So it's just like a replacement for the regular file directory listing stuff, so that it gives me, instead of like navigating to a new screen every time I go into a subdirectory, it just kind of shows it, as like a it kind of just goes over one, tabs in, and then drops down, right? So yeah, using Nerd Tree instead of the regular, I can't remember what it's called.
NetRW.
NetRW. Thank you. Yeah,
Explorer,
instead
yeah.
of that. So are you typically just use NetRW still?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's rare that I'll do directory traversal or tree traversal like that in any
Mm-hmm.
scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's just control P.
Yep.
That's
Same.
mapped to tree sitter, which is
Tree sitter,
tree
you said?
sitter. Sorry, telescope. Telescope is the like finder that's built into NeoVim.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've got control P mapped to that, and there's like find files, there's Git files, there's all of that goodness built in. So you could say like if you wanted to find if you only want to search within the 50 or so files in your project or the 100 or so files in your project, you'd use that. And then I've got control PP PP mapped to do all files, and so then I can go and search vendor if I'm looking for something specific in vendor.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So I've got. Let me make sure that I've got this correct
But there's a
here.
whole bunch of different sources, right? So you could have a mapping. I've got leader B mapped to bring up a telescope pick list or a finder list um for buffers. So all of my open buffers. So if I
Uh-huh.
wanted to
Mm-hmm.
jump between buffers, you can do that, and you've got fuzzy searching and things like that in there as well.
That's
Quick
just your
fix.
most like recently opened files or something like
Yeah,
that,
yeah. So anything
right?
that's in an
Basically.
open buffer. So not necessarily recently opened, but things that you have open, but then if you jump between files and you're not using splits or tabs, these things are still open in buffers sort of in the background. So this allows
Yeah.
you to kind of list all that out and go, okay, well, I want to, I'm in my user model, but now I want to jump to my user controller, or I want to jump to a user factory or my user test. You can search through the open buffers for those four things. So you might only have the model open in the foreground, and if you want to jump back, so if you've got the test open and then you want to go and look at your user model and you want to jump back to your test, you can hit Control 6 or Control caret, and that will jump backwards and forwards between those files.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Nice.
You can use Control I and Control O to jump back through markers. So if you've been navigating through a file,
Oh yeah. Sure.
so you can
Yep.
go forward and backwards through, across buffers and to different edit points in your editor. And then, if you've got, as I said, you've got those four files open, the controller, the model, the factory, and the test. If you use the buffer, like to find the open buffers, then you can jump from like the test to the controller and then to the model and then to the factory. Jump around that way quite easily as well.
Yeah, I do use that all the time. I'll jump back to like the previous file, or I use Control P right now. Opens up my most actually Control E. I think nope. Control P gives me a listing of all my most recent files that I opened, but then it also allows me to fuzzy search across the entire project as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all those things you're talking about, the I and the O, the leader I and O, or control and I and O to do the different. Yeah, is that all part of Telescope as well?
No, so those are standard Vim navigations. So
nice. Okay,
you
cool.
can do that, and that's really handy, especially if you're jumping between like calling a method. So where you're calling some method in your controller, you could like go to the definition of that file or of that method, but then you could use Control O to jump back to the call, and so you could quickly jump backwards and forwards between them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's useful, whether it's jumping between files to the definition, or if you're jumping from like an index method in your controller to a private or a protected method, and then jumping back up to the thing, rather than sort of using
having to Control P and fuzzy search again.
Yeah, to go backwards and forwards. You could easily just jump between those points.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so for those of you who are already lost, I apologize. So let's do this. I am going to recap sort of what we talked about a little bit last time, and then I'm going to kind of walk you through what I did in between then and now, and then we can move forward. So last time we had Michael and Jesse on, and we were talking about what Vim is and sort of the history of Vim. Michael had made the argument that one of the reasons why he really likes it is because Vim, I thought this was really significant, Vim is additive rather than reductive, right? So the idea that with Vim, you start out with very, very, very vanilla, plain, and then you can add to it as you want. Jesse brought up the fact that it's made to be hackable and extendable, right? That is the whole community around Vim is the ability to be able to hack and write your own stuff to make Vim what you'd like it to be. And so I found that was really interesting. So the ability to write Vim script stuff really quick, or Lua, which is what NeoVim uses behind the scenes in order to do some of its scripting. I found that to be really interesting. So we talked a little bit about the different flavors of Vim. We talked about Bram. Well, actually, we talked about Vi, which is just I don't even know what VI stands for, but it's Vi. And then Vim, VIM, is for Vim improved. And we have this Bram Vim, which is what Jesse calls it, I suppose, which is sort of the Vim that most people would use right now. And it uses Vim script, and it's written in C, and Bram is the benevolent dictator of Bram Vim. And then you have NeoVim, which is more of an open source project. It's a fork of Vim. People get credit for their contributions. It's got a more active sort of open source community. It's back compatible with Bram Vim. It's also written in C, but it's extendable with Lua. And with the most recent version that's going to be coming out, it may lose some of that backwards compatibility with Bram Vim. So that's of note. MacVim, we said, was just a wrapper around a Vim window. So it's like if you don't want to have a terminal open and then have to get into Vim, you could just open MacVim and it will be your Vim terminal all set for you. Okay, so we talked about what Lua is a little bit, what Vim script was a little bit. And those are, again, just ways that basically you can extend Vim or write your own little plugins for it. So we talked about the different modes as well in Vim. So we have normal mode, and we have insert mode, and then we have visual mode, and then there was a couple other ones, but those are the main three. And then we talked about some of these movements, right, that you have. So you have the ability, and Michael made the argument that it's not keyboard shortcuts, it's a language, right? So the idea that these are not just keyboard shortcuts you're memorizing, but it's a language. Maybe, Michael, you could expand on that just a little bit real quickly before we move on.
Yeah, I mean, with keyboard shortcuts, there's like one shortcut that maps to one specific thing. So in PHP Storm, you've got like Control P or Command P, which does a certain thing. You've got another mapping that might refactor your code. You've got another mapping that might allow you to rename a symbol or a method or something like that. And then to move around, you would typically use either your up and down arrows if you're in the same file, or you'd go and find your mouse and you'd go and click around your sidebar to find whatever you're looking for there. Whereas in Vim, you would typically, there's a handful of motions and everything is kind of chaining these motions together. So where you would benefit most is to learn the motions and the language, and then you can easily jump around a lot quicker. You can jump forward paragraphs, you can hop around words, you can make selections based on the motions. So if you wanted to select like 3 words, you could do V W W W W and that would go and select the words, or you could go V3W and that would do the same thing, kind of where you're chaining these things together. So you've got modifiers to all of the motions and things like that. So it allows you to really quickly and easily pick things up and move them around, and that's where the power of the the Vim as a text editor is that it makes it really quick and efficient to do that. But then all of the IDE niceties and the LSP on top of that gives you the next level of sort of power to then use it as an IDE.
Okay, nice. Yeah, so they're stackable. They're sort of like composable. These different movements, right? So it's not just a single keyboard shortcut that does a single thing, but it's each one of them has the power to be used in one or more or multiple ways. You can stack and combine them together. Yeah. Okay, cool. We also talked about buffers a little bit. So a buffer is essentially an open file that has maybe been modified, or I guess has been recently opened and has could or could not have changes that are waiting in it to be saved. And so then you have multiple buffers open, and you can change files, and you still have a buffer open for one of those other ones. So it's not going to necessarily change or save your changes until you tell it to. But you can have multiple buffers open at the same time. So you can think of it like tabs that are open in your editor. We started getting into these ideas of creating your own custom key bindings, or being able to trigger your own little Vim scripts using something like a leader key, which I'm still a little bit confused about, but a leader key, which is sort of like a super key or a modifier that you can use typically in normal mode, but you can have leader keys and different bindings in the different modes as well. So you could have it in like insert mode. Um, but then you can do different things. Like, for example, leader RN for Jesse was run nearest test, or leader RL was run last test, right? So those sorts of deals. So we talked about some of those. Jesse talked about his double tap comma mode mapping in inserts that it jumps to the end of the line, writes a comma, and then stays, and then goes to the next line. Semicolon, double tap semicolon does the same thing for him. So if you double tap semicolon, it goes to the end of the line, puts a semicolon in, and then goes down a line. And so those are just little bindings you can create that then you can, I suppose, and I don't know on this one, I don't know where those go. Where do you store those at? Maybe we can kind of start there. I've got a couple other things, but pretty much that's where we left off. I've got lots of other questions, but maybe we could start talking about some of those first. Like leader key, where would I modify that? Where would I store some of these key bindings? Where can I start writing some of my own? If I wanted to do something where I said, when I do this particular leader and then some thing, where can I tell it what to do at that point?
So a leader is like a prefix, or it kind of gives you, I suppose, in a programming context, a namespace in which to house all of your own key bindings. And that's to kind of make sure that, number one, the bindings that you have set up suit you and your preferences and where your hands are on the keyboard and what we talked about mnemonic devices and things that make sense for you.
Yeah.
And the thing that came up was Jesse using leader RN for running the nearest test, whereas I'm using leader TN to test the nearest kind of thing. So those kind of things that just sit with different people in different ways, but effectively doing the same thing. So the leader is a key that you can map in your configuration for Vim. And that's
so that would be
so in BramVim it'd be your .vimrc file, and in NVim it'd be in your init.vim file.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. And actually, suppose I'm going to do one more thing before we go too much farther. I want to talk real quick for those who are maybe just getting started with this, where I sort of went after we ended our discussion. So I found a couple really good tutorials. One main one that I followed, but installing nvim was as simple as going and searching nvim brew, and there's just a formula that you can run if you're using brew, Mac brew, or homebrew, I suppose, right, is what it is. That just allows you to install things to your Mac really easily just using the command line. It's like a package manager for Mac, right? So you can just brew install nvim, I think is what it is. So then I followed this tutorial, and the tutorial gives you some instructions on where you need to set things up, right? So as Michael said, when you're using nvim or neovim, nvim is what you're going to use to open that from the command line, or you can create an alias for vim that just points to nvim. That's fine as well. But then the configuration for that gets stored in a init.vim. It's sort of in a .config and then nvim and then init.vim file. And so that's where you sort of add your configurations for your neovim stuff. But then in addition to that, there is this idea of plugins. In this tutorial that I went through, which I'll share in the show notes, talked about these different plugins that you can use. And so they suggested a bunch of different ones that you can use. And I just basically copied and pasted some of those and then ran plug install, and they installed just like it would if I was using Composer, if I was using NPM. It just installed those plugins and configured them, and now they're available in my Vim. So that was pretty cool. So that was really neat. So there was a couple different plugins that I was looking through, and most of the GitHub repositories have like, okay, here's how you can install it using this different plugin manager, and here's how you can install it using this plugin manager, and here's how you can install it using Vim plug. What package manager do you tend to use, Michael, most of the time?
So I'm using Vim plug. It's
okay.
It's kind of the quickest, well, has been the quickest one, but there's things like Vundle and Pathogen. They're all much of a muchness. I think the key for Vim plug and why I switched over to that from Vundle, which is so Vundle VUNDLE, which is what I was using
I saw that one too, yeah.
Was that it does installations and updates in parallel. So it's it's
Oh,
quicker
nice.
to kind of
Pretty quick. Yeah.
to carry out those things because it's obviously doing all of its cloning and installing and post install steps simultaneously. So yeah, that's what I'm using for a plugin manager, and most of that is fairly straightforward in that you would take the GitHub username / repo and then just put that into your configuration. So you'd have plug
Exactly. Super
space
simple.
and
Yeah.
then like quote, Michael Dorinder / whatever. And that would then just install that plugin, and that's essentially available straight away, pending any other configuration that you want to do. In terms of configuration, whether you're using BramVim or you're using NeoVim, typically it's easy enough just to start out with a single vimrc file, and you can put all of your configuration in one place. And same with NeoVim, you can put everything into an init.vim. And that's a good place to start because you keep everything in one place. You don't have to worry about the overhead of figuring out how to source files or how to load other configuration files and things like that. And it gets you quite a long way in. Probably the next level of sort of extension to that, as you start getting a lot of things in there, is that you might move your plugins into their own file and then source them in. And that way, if you're only wanting to make changes to your plugins, you want to remove something, you want to add another one, then you'd go to your plugin.vim, you'd add to that or change that how you need to, and then you'd run plug install or plug update or whatever it is, and then off you go. You'd source the file and then you'd run that so that it picks up the changes to your file. So that's fairly straightforward. Where I have landed, and I think a few of us, obviously Jesse, but a few of us in the Vim Discord have landed, is on using a plugin that Jesse wrote called Vim Sorcery. And what that does is kind of gives you a structured convention in terms of where to put different files.
Interesting.
And then it sort of handles automatically finding and loading all of those files from a configuration directory, and then you can have separate configuration for each of your plugins. So it gives you a file structure in terms of how to set that up, and that's to have a plugins.vim file, a mappings.vim file in sort of your top level directory alongside your vimrc, alongside your init.vim. Your vimrc would be in your .vim directory. And then you can basically drop anything in there, and then there's a config directory, and then that's where you would have your individual config files for your individual plugins. So I've got, a config for completion, I've got a config for linting, I've got a configuration for I don't know, whatever's in there essentially. Telescope and tree sitter and all those kinds of things, they all have their own configuration file, and it just makes it easier to sort of house all of the specific, plugin specific configurations. And
it's just a framework essentially, right? Like it's made some pre-decisions for you.
Yeah.
So it's like, hey, instead of having to figure it out yourself every time, it's like, no, just use this. This works really well. This is kind of, you're going to need some of these things, so go ahead and do this.
Yeah. And as the configuration grows, you're going to find yourself looking for ways to do that anyway. It's essentially,
I already did that
like
with the plugins.
Yeah.
Because the plugins were really kind of getting pretty crazy pretty quick. And so I just split them out to a separate plugins.vim, plugins.vim, and then I just source it in my init.vim. So just basically includes it at the top, and then I can have all my plug begin and then my plug end, and then I have all my plugins in there, and then I sort of have them broken up. Here's appearance, here's utilities, here's completion, here's Git, stuff like Git gutter and things like that.
Yeah, and that's kind of like a natural progression. Most people will find their way into that. And then the mappings file as well, just to keep all your key bindings in one place.
And that's maybe I think where we can jump in next. So let me just, maybe if I even just share my editor here so you can kind of see what I'm looking at. Let's see, does it only let me share a whole window? Okay, I guess it only lets me share a whole window. It's probably going to ask me, it's like, hey, can you do this? Okay, can you see this okay?
I can. Just give me a sec and I'll see if I can fire up a screen that we can share all this stuff with. Hey, shared screen. Whoop.
And I'm like completely washed out now.
Blinded by your monitor.
Yeah.
All right. So we got. Oh, what have we done? No, I don't want that there. And I don't want that there. I want the screen. Okay. let's just call this shared screen. And we can add a little picture-in-picture business here, and we can add.
And I can close all my other stuff that I was working on.
There we go. All right. So I can see your screen now.
Okay. Great.
Or just your wallpaper and your mouse.
Yeah. So I've got so anyway, I've got my init.vim down here, right? And so I've got my Vim plug directory. I've got my init.vim.
I'm not saying your init.vim. I'm just saying your desktop.
Oh, okay. I'm wondering if, weird. Let me stop sharing here. Switch screen or window. Oh, maybe this way. All right, can you see it now? Or no? Okay, how about now?
I can see the screen, but not anything on it.
Seriously. This is going to be fun. Let me stop sharing real quick and then retry one time. Yeah, it doesn't show anything. No? Nope.
No.
All right, well,
okay, anything there.
Sorry. Zoom is not wanting to cooperate with me. It's not showing me which well, let me see what's available to share. So sorry about that.
That's all right.
So okay, so anyway, I've got the I've got my init.vim file, and so where is the, how do I start saying, like, okay, for example, let's say, like, how do I map my leader key? So what so I guess that's if I'm in normal mode, right? So right now, if I press like colon, right, that gets me to be able to do like
command mode.
Colon. It's command mode. Okay, so that's a different mode. So command mode is something different than what we've been talking about so far. Okay, so command mode is an additional mode to the modes that we've already talked about, which are normal, insert, and visual mode. So we now have a new mode called command mode. Okay, so tell me a little about command mode. What do I typically do from command mode?
So, I mean, the thing you probably do most in command mode is to write a file to, you can do all kinds of different things where you're mapping. So I have a mapping leader LM, which is mnemonic for Laravel make. And what that will do is it'll drop exclamation mark PHP artisan make colon onto the command line. And then I can, do model or factory or controller or test or whatever and name it and then press enter. So it's kind of like a little shortcut rather than jumping out of Vim to the command line or changing panes in Tmux to go to, the project directory and then running PHP artisan myself. I can just get a shortcut to all of that make stuff directly.
So does command mode drop me into a shell? Like drop me into like
it gives you the ability to run things in the shell, but it is
because I typically
contained.
When I do command mode, there's only like one of a couple things that I'm doing. I'm either doing colon and I'm doing W for write, or I'm doing colon WQ for write and quit, or I'm doing colon Q exclamation point for quit without saving, or I'm doing colon explore, right, to get me back to my directory listing. Those are the only things I do in command mode. But you're saying if I type the colon key and then start typing some command, I could actually issue something that I would normally do from the command line?
Anything that you prefix with the exclamation mark will get sent to the shell rather than to Vim. And that's where you can do things like, exclamation mark maker or exclamation mark PHP artisan or artist. I mean, they're the main ones that I do. I don't really do too much else. And they just give you a way to jump out to the shell. If you've ever been editing a file that you don't have access to, and you forgot to sudo vim or sudo nvim, you can do like colon w space exclamation mark sudo t %, and what that does is it will take the current buffer and it will run it through sudo and then run write. And it'll prompt you for your sudo password. So if you're, if you're on a server and you're editing a configuration file, an nginx config or something that you just don't have access to, and you do colon W, it'll say, this is open in read-only mode. But if you do colon W, the rest of it, that will then give you a sudo write, which basically makes it as though you opened the file with sudo permissions. so that you can
Run
then
that by
write
me
that.
again because that happens to me all the time where I open Vim and I'm not in like a I don't have elevated privileges,
Yeah.
right? So if I'm wanting to write this or I'd say like command colon W, right?
Yep.
You're saying colon W and then what do I write after
Yep. So
that?
you would do colon W and then space,
Okay.
exclamation mark, sudo,
Okay.
space.
So the exclamation point does what?
So the exclamation mark says, okay, now send this to the shell.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
back out to bash or whatever, or Z shell.
Yep. Right.
So bang sudo space TEE, which essentially pipes the output. So T is what do you call it? Man page. Whoops, that's not what I wanted. Man page T. So T reads from the standard input and writes. So if you've ever done if you've run an artisan command and you want to watch output, but you also want to send that output to a file, you would do
Sure.
something like PHP artisan my command pipe T.
Right.
So like the pipe character TEE.
Yep.
And so what that does is that it'll send it to standard output to the screen so that you can see it, but then you can also send that output to a file so that you've got that in a history somewhere. So T basically takes the output of the file, runs it and runs the file through saving it.
Interesting. Okay, cool. So colon W and then exclamation point sudo T. Okay, so
Sudo
if
T
I
percent, and percent is like a reference to the current buffer.
gotcha. Okay. So if I'm in Vim and I press colon and I want to send something to the shell, do I have to put exclamation point first?
Yep.
Interesting.
And that essentially tells Vim that everything that follows needs to get sent through the shell rather than to
Okay.
Vim's interpreter.
Gotcha. And if I just press colon, then it's like, hey, I'm in command mode, but only for Vim commands, right? And if I try and type something in there that it doesn't recognize, it's going to say, yeah, I don't know what that is.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, that's helpful. So that's command mode. Okay, so that is not what we're talking about when we're saying we're pressing leader something, right? So I'm in normal mode and I want to say leader whatever. Let's just start with something super simple. Let's say like there's probably another way to create a new file really simply, right? I know if I'm in like what do you call it? CD or netrw, right? I can just press like percentage, right? The percentage symbol.
Yep.
And that would get me a new. Is that how you typically would do that?
It depends.
Or do you have like a
Depends on
command to make a
context.
new?
It
Yeah,
depends on
I suppose it
context. So
does.
if I'm already in netrw or Explorer and I want to create a new file, I might go up to the directory that I need to, and then I'd use percent. If I need to create a directory, you can press D and then it'll ask for a directory name. You create it, hit enter to go into that directory, and then percent to create the file. You can just do, if it's a directory that exists, you can do like :E, and that will create a new file with a given name. Or you could do like :VSP, which will open a vertical split with a new file. So if you go like :VSP space app HTTP controllers post controller, that will create a new file in app HTTP controllers post controller.php and then take you to that file using :E. If you use :VSP, it'll open it in a vertical split, same thing. :SP in a horizontal split, same thing. But yeah, I think in default, like there's no, if the directory doesn't exist, it'll just it'll still create the file, but if you try to write the file, it won't work. Because it's opened up when you open a buffer for a new file, it doesn't exist. It's kind of in memory in Vim until you save it. So if you're trying to save a file into a directory that doesn't exist, then that will fail. And that's usually where I'll like make do first if I'm not wanting to, toggle my way through Explorer to find where I need to create the directory and then create the file.
Got it. Okay, so let's do this.
There is probably undoubtedly a plugin that allows you to like just create a file, and if the directory doesn't exist, it'll create the directory for you.
It'll do it for you. Sure.
I've not used it because like I've just gotten so used to doing it this way that and I've got either Explorer or just like the manual approach. And it's it's rare that I'm creating a file, especially in the context of Laravel. It's rare that I'm creating a file where I would need to do that because I'm like using make controller or make model or make migration or whatever. So it's going to handle creating those directories for me if I need them in any event.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna try and make a really simple, and then I know this is there's an easy way to do this in Vim. So like, but I'm going to say I think this will help me get to what I'm looking at. So let's say that I want to. So like I know for like I just did YYP, which does yank and then that's duplicate, right? YYP is basically duplicate this line. So let's say that I really am not okay with YYP. And what I want to do is I want to map something like leader DD, which is not any faster, right? But like leader D to do that for me. So I know that's a simple example, but maybe I think that would be help me get my head around how I can actually start writing my own. Essentially, they're almost like aliases for me, like in my brain. That's kind of what I map them to in my brain. So how would I do that? How would I create my own little key binding where I can say, I want to have leader, and then I want to press D, leader D, and that's going to duplicate the current line that I'm on.
So, I mean, the first thing, we mentioned this last episode that we weren't sure what the default is. So the default leader key in Vim is /. So anytime
okay, interesting.
in a fresh Vim install, if we say leader and you haven't mapped your own leader key, then you would say / whatever. So leader in that context is /.
Okay.
In my case, I map the leader to comma just because
which I like. I think that feels really good.
Like it's easy for me to go from the home row with my middle finger down to the comma than it is for me to reach with my pinky finger to /.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. So let's talk about that. How do I set my leader key?
So in your vimrc or your init.vim, you just type let space map leader, all one word or lowercase, equals
LEADER map leader equals
let LET.
Yep, let map leader.
Yep, map leader equals, and then quote, comma, close quote. That's it.
Okay. All right. So there is like in this NeoVim init.vim file, I have set and I have let. What is the difference between set and let? Anything?
Good question. Don't know. So here is where everyone's going to find out that I'm a giant Vim fraud. Is that I don't get too in the weeds with a lot of this stuff because you can definitely go down the rabbit hole and you can understand and do all that. I don't know. Like, and it's the same with PHP. I don't know every single thing, but I'll go and look it up if I need to. Let's do it. Let's do it. I've got everyone here. Vim, difference between set and let. Set is for setting options and let is for assigning a value. So set, I guess you would use, I should have known this. I made myself sound like a dummy. Set is like if you have some value within the context of within Vim. So you might see like set shift width. So shift width is a setting in Vim that defaults to some value. If you wanted to change that, so I would go set space shift width equals 4 and set tab width equals 4. So that, and then I would say set expand tab, which would say that, okay, every time I press tab, I want you to expand that tab character into 4 spaces. So set versus let is, that's where it is. Whereas let is where you're defining that variable. And then you'll find in like plugins, they might define a whole bunch of things and they're typically prefixed with a G. So you'd have like set G colon blah
I've
equals
seen that.
whatever.
Yeah, like
and so that then sets that parameter or that variable in the plugin, and then you can override that using let.
Okay. So in this case, would I be to set my leader key, would I be using let or would I be using set? So map let. Leader.
Okay. Because leader key already, or the leader is already set within.
It already exists.
Vim.
Yes.
So you're wanting to, it has a default. So you're wanting to override that now.
Yeah. Okay. So then, just to make sure that this is all good, and also after I've made a change to something like this, I want to resource my init.vim file, right?
Yeah. So
do you have a shortcut for doing something like that, or do you just?
I've got it set so that whenever I write my vimrc, it will source it. but I usually just like colon SO space %. And what that will do is that will source the current buffer.
Nice.
Now,
So colon, yeah, and then colon SO is SO a special Vim command then
SO
for
is
source?
just shorthand. So you'll find that you can use shorthand for a lot of things. So instead of saying source, you could just do SO. And it's kind of like the same with artisan commands. Like you could do
Interesting.
PHP
Nice.
artisan K:\G, and that will key generate because it will try and expand and find the nearest matching
Yeah.
thing that it knows about. So, S:\S, well, that's going to give you a whole bunch of different things, but :SO, there's nothing else in, the
Defined to that. Yeah, sure.
defined for that. So it'll go, okay, so we're just going to assume that this is source. So yeah,
Yeah, and I do
:SO
that
%.
when I do explore, I do colon EX, right?
Right.
And also like Vim
there's
is
nothing else
case
there.
sensitive as well, right? It seems like. So like with explore, it's uppercase E and then lowercase x for like explore, right?
Yeah.
So okay, interesting. So I've got map leader. So now I've got map leader set to comma. So what's something that is there anything set to use leader and then some letter that is like a common mapping? So like could I just check to see that it's working? Like if I press leader and then what?
If you wanted to see if something exists, you could do set. I think it's set, and then the mapping. So if you were to do like set, you do nmap, right? So if you were to look at all of your mappings in normal mode, you could go :nmap, and it will show you everything that maps in normal mode and what it
Ooh.
is. So
Okay, I gotta write this down.
You can go and see if there's any collisions in there.
Okay, so if I'm in normal mode and then I do :nmap, that gives me a listing of all of my different, and these are what would come after a comma. This is what would come after my leader key.
It will show you all of your normal mode mappings.
Okay.
And it will actually expand the leader key to whatever your leader key is.
Yeah, it does. It's showing me that comma.
Yeah.
There,
so you'll see that there's like a whole assortment of
comma
things.
HP, comma HU, comma HS, which is like, in this case, get gutter has set up those for me, right? It's got leader, get gutter, preview hunk, undo hunk, stage hunk, previous hunk.
Correct.
Right. Yeah.
So
and then other than that, I don't have a lot of comma anything set because
there'd be all defaults or things that are offered by plugins. So this is where you'll find, if you've got comma, it will expand that leader to comma. If you've got it as a space, it'll expand that to space. It'll expand to whatever. When you are defining your own mappings, you would use angled bracket, leader, closing angled bracket. So you wouldn't use like comma as your mapping. You would put leader, and that way, if you ever change the leader to space or whatever else that works for you, then that will automatically get resolved.
Nice. Okay.
So nmap, vmap, imap, these are all things that you can use to check your existing mappings. If you find that like you've created a mapping and it's not working, you can go and see if there's any collisions to see what it is actually mapping to.
Interesting. Okay, so vmap then is for visual mode and imap is for insert mode, right? Okay. Yep. Insert mode mappings. Okay, cool. So I want to do a nmap. So I want to do let's do an imap, so an insert mode mapping. So if I wanted to make it so that when I press comma D, that duplicates my line. What do I need to do there? Where do I put that at? Where do I store that like binding at?
So you could in Vim sorcery, you would put that in a mappings.vim file. In a standard install, you would probably just put it in your vimrc.
Okay, so I'm just like in nvim, I'm just gonna put it in my init.vim.
Correct.
Okay, all right. So what do I start typing then? Do I do is it a let?
So in bindings, you would just type. So you're doing it in insert mode.
So yeah, right, exactly. In insert mode, I want to do comma D, right, and then it would duplicate my line.
So there's two ways of going about it. There's imap and I know remap.
Okay.
So the no remap essentially means to avoid recursive mappings, so that it doesn't, like if you were to have a mapping where you've got like leader DD, and then as part of that mapping you have DD in the mapping, I know map or I know remap or whatever is to avoid it trying to expand that mapping from your mapping
I
and then
see.
calling itself recursively.
Got it. Okay.
In this scenario, we won't need to worry about it. So you could just do IMAP.
So I just type colon IMAP or just IMAP?
Just IMAP.
Okay.
And then leader.
So is it angle bracket leader, or do I type leader? What do I type?
Yep. So IMAP angle bracket leader closing angle bracket.
Okay. And then
DD.
DD. Okay.
And then space.
Okay.
And then you would just type YYP.
Interesting. Okay.
And then
so I'm gonna
angle bracket CR closing angle bracket, which represents a carriage return. So pressing enter.
Okay. So after YYP, I'm gonna do angle bracket.
In fact, you don't even need that. You could probably do without it.
Okay. Yeah, because it kind of already does that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we do SO percentage to source, and then I'm gonna do comma DD, and it deleted it. Which because DD is delete the line, right?
Yeah, but you have to do an insert mode, right? Now, what you'll find.
Yes, that's right. Right. You're right.
In fact, this is probably going to be problematic because, I wonder. Oh no, that's fine. Yeah, no, that's fine. So what you'll find when you do that in insert mode is it doesn't actually yank the line and then paste it. What it's going to do is it's going to insert the string YYP at your cursor.
Okay.
Right, and that's because YYP is not an insert mode motion.
You're right. That's a normal mode. Right.
So what you would do is before the YYP is you have angle bracket ESC closing angle bracket, and that's to signify to Vim that before you run this, before you press YYP effectively, you want to escape to go back to normal mode, then run YYP.
It did it. Yay, it worked.
Right, and then you'll find that puts you like probably at the start of the line, and it's probably still in
it
normal mode.
It's back. It's in normal mode. Yep.
So, I mean, I guess you would want to go I at the end of that mapping then.
So just type I, like the letter I, or do I have to do angle brackets or anything?
Nope, just I.
YYPI?
Yeah, YYPI. And so what that will do is that's the same as what you would do. You would press escape on your keyboard. You would go yank, YYP, and then I, and that will take you back to the insert mode.
Oh my gosh, so freaking cool.
But this
that's
is like
really sweet.
And this is where it comes down to like this works for you. I think, and we touched on this last episode with Jesse, is that you kind of in the Vim world get used to going into and out of mappings.
Yeah, right.
And it's like you're not in insert mode, you're in normal mode, you're going to insert to do something and then you're leaving. And it's kind of reflexive after a period of time that you would like type something and then hit escape.
Right, it is. Yeah, correct. That's where I'm at right now. Like I've done it enough now that I press escape immediately. As soon as I do anything, I'm already in normal mode again. So, yeah, it's.
So you're never in insert mode. You're really in normal mode, waiting to go into the next insert.
Right. So if I would just probably type nmap on this one, then right.
Well,
so then.
Well, no, and what I'm getting at is that, once you use Vim for a period of time, I wouldn't do, comma DD in insert mode very often. I would hit escape, yank, paste as a more like, and that's kind of more, Vim like is to not find ways to do normal mode motions in insert mode. It would be getting yourself into the mindset that you would leave insert mode to run that motion.
Right.
And then, go back and proceed on the next thing. So
that makes sense. So basically I have, if I wanted to do an nmap, an imap, or a vmap, or anything like that, if I want to bind a mapping, that's what I have to first specify. So I have to understand that there's 3 different mapping sets, essentially. Or I suppose, is there maybe more? Is there other modes? Like, is there cmap for command mapping or no?
No.
Okay, so nmap, imap, vmap. Those are the 3. So if I want to have a normal mode mapping, the way that I write it is nmap, just like that, space, and then I'm going to type leader in angle brackets. So that's like a special way to denote to Vim, hey, I'm using one of your special sort of keywords here, your reserved keywords here that you're going to have specified. So angle bracket, leader, angle bracket, and then I'm going to type my key that's going to come after leader. So like leader D in this case is sort of like my key binding, my shortcut. And then after that, I'm going to press space, and then I'm going to tell it what I want it to do. What keys do I want it to press when I do leader D in normal mode?
Yep.
And in this case, because I was in the insert mode, I could do, again, one of those reserved names, angle bracket escape, angle bracket ESC, and angle bracket. It will get me back out of insert mode. And I will do YYP, which was yank, yank, paste. And then I would get me back into insert mode. And that's it. So you have which mapping you're doing, Nmap, IMAP, or VMAP, the shortcut, leader, and then the number or the letter, and then your actual keys that you would type in order to perform whatever action you're wanting to do.
Yep. And
that's awesome.
That's probably a good place to start, when you're trying to sort of shortcut those processes before you kind of bring up the muscle memory to do that. The other thing that you're often going to find yourself using mappings for is calling out to either native Vim methods or calling other plugin commands or things like that. So you'll find that for the most part, all of your bindings, like we talked about test nearest and all of that stuff last week, where you would go leader TN space and then colon. So I will write the file. So I will go, :W, carriage return, test nearest. And what that's going to do when I run leader TN from normal mode is it will write the file and then it will call test nearest, which is provided by the Vim test plugin. And that just makes sure that, like, for all of my open buffers, everything's saved. So I don't have to worry, if I've made a bunch of changes and I'm going through the red, green refactor cycle, I don't have to like make sure the files are saved and then go and run test manually. It will just go and do all of that for me and then run the test. And that's so that you don't get into that inconsistent state with your, test in that this, I made all these changes, but nothing's happened because, you forgot to save the files. So, it's a good way to shortcut that kind of stuff that you're doing a lot. You're going to be running tests a lot. You're going to be running your last test, running the last test that failed and then going from the test to the controller to the model, bouncing around to 3 different files to, extend some functionality or to add a model factory or to do that kind of thing, rather than having to, control your way back to the class or go through your buffers or whatever. You can just run, test last or the, leader TL to test last, and that will go and save all of those files and then go and run your last test. So it's really about shortcutting the kind of tedious things and the repetitive stuff. But for things like, general motions that are just offered by Vim, the more you get to use Vim, I think typically, at least certainly in my experience, and from what I've seen from other people, is that you will jump out of insert mode, go to normal mode, do the thing, go back to insert mode, or go to visual mode and make a selection that you want to apply some things on and do it that way. So it's it's all about quickly editing text. It's not, it's not about all of the features and the refactorings and all that kind of stuff. It's about helping you edit text in the most quick and efficient way possible, really.
Love it. Okay, very cool. So we have learned about mappings. That one plugin that you just talked about, which you said was called Vim Test, I think is what you said. I need to look at that. Okay, so Vim Test plugin, that's something I need to look at. Okay, one more thing I wanted to talk about real quick before we wrap this up, because we are at about the 52-minute mark. So you and Jesse both mentioned that you use Tmux. So Tmux can be used locally. It's great. I think Tmux for me has been most helpful when I want to get into I want to get a SSH session. I want to get a shell session into one of my remote servers, right? And let's say I want to run a job. So like a couple weeks ago, there's this process that downloads and expands the zip and then runs through all these CSVs and then reads all the CSVs and writes values into the database and then goes and downloads all these files that are up there that are phone calls that need to be downloaded locally to be persisted, saved, so they can be analyzed by whatever it is, right? Okay. Well, you can imagine just talking through that. That's a longer process, and it was 4:30, and I didn't want to wait for that to get done, so I
Mm-hmm.
jump over to my server. As soon as I get on that server, I type Tmux, and what Tmux does is it will open a local session on that machine. So my SSH session is not connected directly to a session it is, but it's basically proxying me into that server and then jumping me into this session that lives on the server itself. What that allows me to do is start a job or start something
Mm-hmm.
on that server and then get out of that session or just leave that terminal completely, and it's still running on that server, right? And then if I come back to that server later, I can tmux ls, which will show me all my running sessions or all my listed sessions, and then I can attach back to that previous session that I created. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what I've used Tmux for. However, it sounds like you guys are using Tmux for almost like Vim window management, if I can call it that, right? So being able to do vertical, horizontal splits, things like that. And I guess what Tmux also allows you to do is if you had a project open previously, you might be able to attach to that session and get right back to where you were. Like I had
Mm-hmm.
my tests open over here. I had, a couple different, and actually this would be really handy because I had a project recently where I was on a branch, right? And I was really deep in the weeds, and I had these 3 or 4 files open, and I needed to be able to keep those open because that's where I had kind of sort of left off. But there was a couple occasions where I needed to jump out of that branch and back into the master branch and make a quick change, and I didn't want to lose that like editor. Like I wanted to keep those windows. So I'd end up opening Sublime or Vim over here somewhere so I could get to
Mm-hmm.
different files and not lose my spot. With Tmux, I could have just saved that session essentially, jumped out to a brand new session, switched branches, right? And then come back to that session previously, right? Come
Sort
back to
of.
that other session later. Okay, so anyway, that's my brief understanding of Tmux, and I'm sure we're going to get really into the weeds on this. So we'll try and keep it brief here, but overall, how is it that you use Tmux to sort of handle doing your Windows stuff?
Mm-hmm. So that scenario that you just described, where you're going to jump between branches, that will sort of
Sure,
work. Because if you were to close the session, start a new session, you're going to change branches,
sure, yeah,
and so you go from your feature branch back to master branch. Now, if you forget that you're in master branch, when you go back to that first session, which you're expecting to be in your feature branch, you'll find that when you open NeoVim, it's going to reload that file and you're going to see the changes from master.
mm,
So this is like a whole other thing, and this is in GitLand where we're using work trees. And so I will check out a bare repo, which basically clones down everything, but you don't have any branches in there, and you check out work trees. And that way you can have master branch, and you can have a feature branch and a bug fix branch, and you can have like 10 different branches open all at the same time, and you just jump between directories, and that is a representation of that feature. And so that's really useful when you're doing pull requests locally, or if you're working across multiple features that are related or maybe unrelated, and you want to be able to go, okay, here's my master copy. And where this is really useful is that I've always got a copy of master checked out at any time. And if I need to do any regression testing or I need to look at anything in master in the browser, then I know master's always there, and I can just do a git pull without having to stash and switch branches and composer install and all that kind of stuff. And I don't have to worry about the scenario where you're in, where you might lose some changes as you're switching between branches, because each branch is effectively open in its own directory. So it
that's
doesn't
interesting.
affect.
And what's that called?
So
I've
it's
never heard of this.
Git work trees. And that's a
Work trees?
whole other, yeah, Git work tree. So that's built right into Git. But that's a
Nice.
whole other thing that we can talk about another time. In terms of Tmux, the way that I use it is that I open iTerm and it goes to full screen, and then I open Tmux. And so I've got, every time I open a new shell, I've got a script in my Z shell RC, like my configuration file, that goes,
Yep.
is Tmux running? If it's not, go and attach to the last session. If there isn't a session, go and create a new session. So I've always got Tmux open anytime iTerm is open. And
That's cool.
so
Okay.
the way that I do that is that I use a session to represent a project. So we've got our backend and our front end, our separate repositories, the separate projects. So I will have one session that is the backend, and then I'll open a new session that's got the front end open in it. And so rather than switching between windows or switching between projects, they're just always there, and I can just
And you
switch
can name
between
these sessions
And you
too,
can name the
right?
sessions, so I can
And
go, and jump between them whenever I need to. So if I'm working on the front end and the back end, or I need to, start the npm build server because we're using Nux for the front end, then I can jump into the front end directory or the session. I can run, the npm build process, and then I can jump straight back to the back end, to where my code is for the API, open it in the browser, and look at the UI and then make changes. And it's just like off there in the background somewhere going about its business, the front end. But I've got that even for my own personal stuff. I've got a client that has 3 different projects open. So each one of those projects is in its own session. Any of my personal stuff is in its own session. I've got then ping me that's open in its own session. So these things are always just open, and I just switch between them, rather than jumping between directories in one place and then having to do all this stuff. Because then, then ping me might have a pane open for Vim, and then there's a pane for test, and I've got like npm running or whatever, like all these different things for different projects and different scenarios. But the main one for work at the moment is that I've got the backend, which is Laravel API, open in one session, and then I've just got like npm running in another session to build the front end and serve that.
That makes sense. So that actually answers another question. It answers another question for me too, which was, how do you switch quickly between projects, right? So in PHP Storm, I press Command. It's like a super. It's like Command Control Shift P, and then I can just type in, I want to work on whatever it is, right? And that will get me back to the last set of files that were open in that. It'll switch me over to that project, right? It scopes all of my searches to just be for that particular project that I'm in, right? It does all that for me. And so basically your answer to that is Tmux. So you just have named sessions in Tmux. And so now, do those persist across reboots and all that stuff? Or when you have a reboot, do you have to get all those sessions back started? And how does that work?
So there's a Tmux plugin called Resurrect that I use, and that allows me to kind of save the state. So I could, if I've got 6 or 7 different sessions open, I can save the state so that when I open Tmux the next time after a reboot, I can restore that state, and it will go and restore all those windows and the panes and the configurations they were in. It won't reattach to remote sessions, like if I'm SSH somewhere or something like that, but it's not a problem the majority of the time. But being able to say, like, I like to have a 70-30 or an 80-20 split of like Vim and then another pane for running LazyGit or running tests or whatever, then it will remember that kind of window configuration for each session. And that way I don't have to worry about, opening it and then spacing it out and all of that kind of stuff. There's other plugins. There's like Tmuxinator that allows you to sort of configure, like, I want a PHP project, and then you would open the PHP project in a given directory and it would go and set up all your panes and splits and things like that. I don't go to that extent, but it's certainly a possibility.
And is that a Tmux config stuff? So like you're talking about these Tmux plugins. Does Tmux have its own like plugin sort of package manager deal?
Yeah, so it's got like, you can have plugins, and then you've got the Tmux plugin manager, which is another thing that you throw in there, and then it goes and figures out what you've got, and then you run it's very similar to using vplug, but for Tmux.
Okay, so that's a whole nother ball of wax I need to go sort of explore now, is Tmux and all that good stuff. Because right now, I know that you said like there's like VSP was like vertical split, right? And is that in command mode, command VSP?
Yep.
VSP?
Yeah, so you can go like VSP is another one of those shortcuts. So :VSP is a shortcut for vsplit, VSPLIT. But I've got that mapped to like leader V, and then that will,
if you're in normal mode,
Yep. And that'll just like open a vertical split. I've got leader H will open a horizontal split, because that makes more sense, like vertical, horizontal. And
so you said that you
can.
So is that
less typing?
Is that an nmap?
Yeah.
Okay, so like if I want to do that real quick, so I'm going to do that, and maybe we can just stop there. But nmap, and then I'm going to do leader, and I'm going to do V.
Yep.
And then I'm going to space, and that's going to do. So do I have to type colon?
And
then VSP. Yep. Is it capital V?
No, lowercase.
Lowercase, and SP, same thing.
Yep.
And then I'm going to do the same thing for H. Say CR, and instead of VSP, this one's going to be HSP, right? And when I do carriage return, is
So
that
not
sort of
HSP,
one of
it
those
would just
special?
be SP.
Just SP. Okay.
Yeah. And carriage return is your symbol for enter. So if you were just to leave it as :VSP without the enter, what that would do is it would put :VSP into the command insert mode, and then it would place your cursor at the end of the VSP, and then you could type whatever you want. So
right. So if I want to do carriage
if,
return, what do I type? Return, like angle bracket return.
Angle bracket CR.
CR.
Yeah, and
capital
closing.
CR or lowercase.
It doesn't matter.
I
typically just do lowercase. Some people prefer uppercase. It's less. You don't have to look for that shift key if it's all lowercase.
Okay. All right, here we go.
The horizontal split is just
Got it.
SP.
Cool. There we go. I'm going crazy. Okay, so now how do I close these ones?
So to close a split, you just :Q.
And do you have do you have a mapping for that too?
No, I just :Q.
:Q.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. Awesome, man. This is great. Okay, so I have learned in this session, we've recapped what I learned last time. We have talked about being able to see all of my key mappings from :nmap, :vmap, :imap. I have learned how to put a new map. Is it a mapping or is it a key binding? Which one? Which would you call it?
For mappings is the name of the file, but they're key bindings.
Okay. Gotcha. I've learned about Vim test plugin, which I have to take a look at. Git work trees, which is a whole thing I have to explore still, which I think is really interesting.
Come to that much later.
Much later. Okay. And then we talked about Tmux a little bit. So Tmux for window management stuff. So this idea of being able to open a Tmux shell session every time I open a new window. If I don't have one running, that's interesting to me. Using sessions to represent projects is also pretty cool, naming those sessions. And then a couple things to look at with like Tmux plugins, Resurrect, Tmuxinator, and then the Tmux plugin manager to sort of push all those things in there. So I know nothing about Tmux as far as like configuration stuff, so I'll have to look at that a little bit. But the thing that I mostly learned today is how to map new key bindings, which I think is pretty dang cool. That's very, very handy. Yep. Awesome. Okay, dude. Thanks. Hey, folks. Nice. Thanks for sticking with us. It's been an hour and 5 minutes of Michael basically teaching me how to do Vim goodness. So if you like this sort of stuff and you think this is helpful, feel free to stick around for the next episodes. We'll probably do a couple more of these. I'm going to do some homework this next time. And by the time we're through a couple more of these episodes, at least one more, hopefully we've got a bare bones Vim set up. And I can get to work using that. Awesome. Thanks, dude, again, for your help. I really appreciate it.
Beautiful. No worries.
Awesome. All right. Well, this is episode 1. I think you would say 113.
114?
114? 114. Let me hold on. I'm going to double check real quick. 1 second. iCloud Drive, podcast, NMS. This is 114. Hey, episode 114, you can find the show notes for this at northmeetsouth.audio/114. Hit us up on Twitter at Jacob Bennett, at Michael Dorinda. And as always, if you like the podcast, feel free to rate it up in your podcatcher of choice. 4 stars would be 4 stars. 5 stars would be much appreciated. 4 stars would be much appreciated too. Anything for this at this point. But we are losing an hour of sleep tonight, and so it is technically 12:25 right now. So I am
springing
beat
forward
tomorrow morning.
You can't have my son. You can just leave my son here. It was perfect today. We went down to the beach.
Yeah, it looked like
with a friend that we haven't seen, literally hadn't seen him for 11 months. So went and did that, and kids were running around, tied themselves out. It was great. But I think we're getting towards
Hopefully
the end of our warm weather.
Yeah, I'm sorry, dude. I'm sorry. We'll take it back here. I'm missing it for sure. Awesome. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for hanging out. We'll see you next time.
Bye.